Well, next up we have Sandra, or Sandy Patrick, to speak about Southwest Florida's beautiful blue jewels.
All right. Good morning. My name is Sandra Patrick, and I'm an ecologist with Mosaic Fertilizer. Over the last 10 years or so, Mosaic has created a scrub jay translocation program with the primary goal of taking jays from other portions of our property and creating a new population with them near the geographic center of the existing metapopulation. But before I get too far into those details, I'd like to recognize our partners on the project with the translocation, and that is Reed Bowman, Dr. Reed Bowman with Archibald Biological Station, David Gordon with Quest Ecology, and Lauren Diener, formerly of Quest Ecology. They have given their time and their expertise and helped develop a wealth of information about scrub jay biology and translocations. So a little background, and I'll go through this pretty quickly, about the scrub jay. They are listed as threatened by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service since 1987. The main reason they're threatened is due to habitat loss from land conversions, fragmentation of the habitat, and fire exclusion. Fire exclusion is one of the primary reasons. The state of Florida did a scrub jay statewide survey in 1992 and 93, and they showed that the Florida scrub jay had disappeared from 10 of 39 counties in the state where they originally had been existing. So the population has been declining in the state and probably has declined even more since that time. The habitat needs are fairly specific. They need dry uplands with open herbaceous stratum. Usually the tree structure needs to be less than 10 to 12 feet tall, and the vegetation structure needs to have periodic fire every 3 to 5 years or so, depending on the level of that structure, in order for the vegetation to remain open, because they cache their acorns in that open sand. A little bit about the ecology. Again, they're habitat specific, and they live in family groups. And the main thing about these birds, they're very interesting. They are the only bird in the state, or maybe in the U.S., but certainly in the state, that are cooperative breeders, meaning that their offspring stick around with the breeding pair for a couple of years afterwards, and they actually help with gathering food and defense and security of the nest site. And those are called helpers, and they generally don't disperse and go form their own family groups until about 2 to 4 years. So they're a very unique bird. Mosaic did surveys on our property that was going to be disturbed, and we found that we had, by 2001, we had about 50 birds on our property. And I'm going to point to, they were in areas in, They were in areas of Hillsborough County and Manatee County, in groups that were fairly isolated and fairly small and suboptimal habitat. These areas were permitted for take through the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, but Mosaic said, you know, we don't want to just destroy the habitat and not do anything for the birds. And so we started looking at, is there a way that we can take the birds and translocate them to a larger area, an area that has better habitat, where they can thrive and perhaps even grow the population. And so we started looking around. And we had recently acquired this property down here called the Wellfield from Manatee County. And we looked at the habitat and come to find out that it had about 700 acres of type 1, type 2 habitat that the scrub jays needed, very dry, very upland, sandy soils. But the habitat was very overgrown. The structure that we currently had in our population was pretty much a combination of very patchy and non-equilibrium, which means that long-term viability of the existing population, they wouldn't persist. They just would continue to decline. And so we started looking at the Wellfield to create this mainland island structure. So if we were able to take our birds and translocate them to the Wellfield, and then the Wellfield was surrounded by about 3,500 acres of other public conserved lands, and that would create the mainland and then the island structure, and hopefully get them to persist long term. So this is the setup of our property. The Wellfield, which is the release site, is down here. And then we have Duette Preserve, which is Manatee County Park System, a large acreage to the north. And we have Swift-Mudd's Coker Park to the south. And then we have other areas that the birds can disperse to of other state-protected lands. So the setup was really unique and very desirable for this type of structure. So why translocation? Well, we had about a large source population. Again, we had about 50 birds and about 14 families on our property that was permitted for take through the Endangered Species Act. Dr. Reed Bowman did population modeling of the birds, and it pretty much showed that if they stayed where they were going to, there was a high probability of extinction. And again, due to fragmentation, they were very isolated. The habitat was not very good, and we had a lot of birds that were either singles or in just a couple of pairs, and they would continue to decline. So after doing the modeling and looking at, well, if we had the birds, if we used the large area, I'll go back a couple slides. If we used the largest area that we had and enhanced that population, what would that do? That was certainly a consideration. And after doing the modeling, the model showed that the best chance the birds had was to use the Wellfield because of all the opportunity for continued dispersal. The model showed that they had the best chance of long-term persistence. Now, the model did show that after about 100 years, there was still a high extinction probability. However, that setup, the mainland island structure setup, gave the birds the best chance of long-term survival and persistence. So we went through habitat management plan development with Fish and Wildlife Service. We had identified our baseline population. We determined which jays were at immediate risk of extinction. We provided mitigation for the proposed impacts. One of the key components of our plan was coordinating with our adjacent landowners, our neighbors, for them to manage their land as well. And that is Duette Preserve with Manatee County and Swift-Mudd and some of the Florida state lands that were within dispersal distance. And then in 2003, we started the translocations. But before we did that, we started a banding program where we banded all the birds on, there was a small source population on the Manatee Duette Preserve, and there was, I believe, one pair on the Wellfield. So we banded all those birds starting in '99. Now we just band the birds as needed. And then we had to start management of the Wellfield. So we broke the Wellfield up into 15 different management units and started really managing. And this site was very overgrown. It had very large trees, very thick, dense palmetto. We roller chopped where we could. We had to, at times, cut the trees down with chainsaws and drag them off site. And then we burned, and we burned, and we continued to burn. And we still continue to burn today. So we started that in 2001. So by October 2002 and January 2003, the large trees had pretty much disappeared. And here's a photo of what a lot of the Wellfield looks like today. Different burn units look differently because we're burning them rotationally at different times. So, translocation methods. The first method is you've got to acclimate the birds. They're very, very smart. So we use some dummy traps on platforms with peanuts. They love peanuts. And we got them acclimated to the traps, a dummy trap at first, and then we put the real traps on the ground, and we're able to successfully trap them. And then we do some data collection when we get the bird. We weigh them, we take a blood sample and measure them and make sure that they're healthy and record all that data. Then we translocate them, we load them in the truck and take them out to the release site, which has a platform on it, again with a cage and some peanuts, and we continue to provide them with supplemental food and water. They stay in the hacking cages about anywhere from 3 to 5 days, something like that, to get them acclimated to the release site. And that's the acclimation period, and the jays are happy. And then we have to recapture them and before release. So you kind of have to, again, coax them with peanuts and get them to go into the trap again before they can be released. And then the tracking begins. And we did put transmitters on them initially to track where they go. We wanted to keep track of where they were dispersing to. And so where are we today? After 10 years, almost 10 years of translocations, we have, in fact, last year translocated the last of the birds, and again, there were about 50 of them. As you can see, it was a little slow to start out, but over the last 5 years or so, the population has really taken off. As of this year, we have 82 birds in 29 groups that are occupying the Duette Preserve, Swiftmuds Coker Park, and the Wellfield. And so we're quite happy with these results. We don't have any more birds to translocate, and so we're just going to be continuing to maintain the property with fire and any other maintenance that it needs, and track the birds and see what happens. This translocation is, I think, one of a kind in the state. I don't think anybody else has done that, so we're kind of looking around and we'll, continue to track and see how they do. This map shows the dispersal. All the birds that we've translocated were released on the Wellfield. Early this year, we counted that there were 34 out of 40 birds on Duette Preserve that were either translocated birds or the offspring of translocated birds. So the management that Duette Preserve has done and continues to do has definitely made this project a success and helped to grow the scrub jays. Some of the little statistics of the successful translocation results. We've had 90% success of the birds staying on either the Wellfield or Duette Preserve 8 weeks after post-release. Our average survival to 6 months to 1 year is about 70%. We had 23 groups that attempted to breed in 2011, and 14 fledged 39 young, and we were just really proud. Dr. Bowman is very happy with those results. And then about 81% of the jays in 2011 actively defended new territories, and that's really important with these birds as they disperse and bud off their the breeding pair, is that you want the offspring to go to another habitat in the area and then defend that territory and set up their own family group. What started off as again, the non-equilibrium, we now have in the state. This is kind of looking statewide. There's about 152 birds in 55 groups, and with 11 subpopulations. When you compare it with the 92 initial modeling that was done, we have more birds in slightly fewer groups. There were originally 60 groups, but with the one large patch and the mainland island structure, you have increased viability and hopefully, and we believe long-term. So this is just a comparison of the non-equilibrium, kind of scattered and patchy habitat from 1992-93, and this is what it looks like today with the main patch and then the other islands of habitat. And the important thing is Dr. Bowman just this year remodeled with the actual data over 10 years, and the model showed that the change in the scrub jay distribution, going from the non-equilibrium and patchiness to the mainland island structure, reduced the extinction probability by 75%. So there's now a very high probability that this metapopulation will persist. So anyway, conclusions. Translocations can be an effective conservation tool. The success of this translocation was increased when we had suitable but largely unoccupied nearby habitat. The main thing about that is that the land protection and the management of the adjacent dispersal lands, and I would definitely want to thank our partners and our neighbors on this project, Manatee County, Duette Preserve, Swiftmud, and the state of Florida. Without their help, this project would not have been the success it is. Thank you, and now I'll take questions.
So are there questions for Sandra? I had one.
Okay.
On your charts, it almost looked like there was pretty consistently through the period of record 3 birds per group. Is that about how it breaks up, or?
Yeah, actually our group size has increased. We're now at about, when I looked at the data from 2011, I have not looked at all the data. We don't have all the data from 2012. The data from 2011 was about 3.5 now birds per group. So what we're doing is we're creating more groups, but we're also creating larger families and expanding the numbers per group.
And on your map there, where you were comparing the population distributions, there were red marks in the current period. What does red mean versus the green?
Yeah, the red is the translocation. So that's the new distribution of the jays, the new island, mainland island structure, as opposed to the wide-ranging patchiness of the old structure.
But does the red mean a certain number of birds?
Locations.
Just locations.
Those are just locations, not
okay.
numbers.
Based on the success of this translocation, do you anticipate having any extra jays in the future or expanding further afield?
Well, on our property, we have no other known jay populations. Now, that's not to say that we couldn't, discover some populations. So we don't have any immediate plans to do any more translocations, but you never know what the future might bring.
After you did the habitat change to bring it into better jay habitat, did you have any scrub jays move to the site that were not translocated scrub jays?
Yes. I can't tell you how many. David Gordon, I know, is in the audience, but yes, there have been birds that are not banded. So we do have birds that are coming in from other areas, and I think that's one of the main successes of this project is it's pulling in birds because the habitat is now right for them. It's pulling in birds from other areas.
Okay, thank you so much. That was very interesting.